Have you noticed how exhausting it is when people spend their days running after attention that never quite arrives? A message is sent, and then silence stretches. A photo is posted, and the heart waits for the validation of a like, a comment, some signal that existence has been acknowledged. This endless chase is not rare, it has become the rhythm of modern life. Nietzsche once observed that even in self-contempt there is a form of respect, because at least the individual has turned inward rather than bowing to others. But in the world today, many hand their dignity away by measuring themselves against fleeting signs of recognition. Crowds form, trends rise, groups pull people in with the promise of belonging. And yet, more often than not, that belonging costs individuality itself. Modern psychology now explains what Nietzsche saw long before neuroscience had a name for it. When approval is chased, the brain responds like a gambler at the slot machine, addicted to the uncertainty of reward. Every silence, every absence of acknowledgement feels like a verdict. And so energy drains, not in creating, not in living, but in waiting. This is the hidden weakness of seeking validation, the dependence that slowly empties self-respect. And that is where our journey begins. Because if chasing approval has the power to weaken, then refusing the chase must hold the power to strengthen. Nietzsche knew this, and it is the first lesson we must confront: the weakness of seeking validation. Nietzsche warned us that dependence on the approval of others is the surest path to weakness. For him, the spirit that constantly bends, that stretches itself thin to be accepted, is not living, but merely reacting. And what is a life built on reaction but a life at the mercy of others? When worth is tied to the nods and smiles of the crowd, dignity is surrendered in advance. Today, science confirms the silent chains Nietzsche described. Neuroscience has shown that the brain's reward system, especially the dopamine pathways, lights up in the same way whether the stimulus comes from a chemical drug or from a simple notification on a screen. To seek constant approval is to train the nervous system to crave uncertainty. A like, a reply, a fleeting signal. The very structure that makes gambling addictive. And just as the gambler grows weaker with every spin, the seeker of validation grows smaller with every unanswered silence. But weakness here is not only biological, it is existential. Nietzsche called it herd morality, the willingness to be shaped by external praise rather than by inner conviction. Consider the way people soften their words to avoid offense, dress according to what is fashionable rather than what is authentic, or exhaust themselves trying to maintain an image that was never truly theirs. These are not mere habits. They are confessions of dependency. The individual becomes a mirror reflecting others rather than a flame burning from within. There is also the matter of energy. Modern psychology describes attention as a finite resource, much like a muscle that fatigues with overuse. Each moment spent obsessing over whether someone approves or rejects is energy drained from creation, from thought, from becoming. Over time, this depletion carves hollows within the soul. One may appear busy, even admired, but inside there grows an emptiness, the quiet realization that life has been lived in borrowed eyes. Nietzsche's challenge was brutal but liberating. Stop proving your worth. Power, he said, belongs to those who can stand firm in their solitude, unbent by applause and unshaken by indifference. The one who no longer seeks validation begins to radiate a different kind of strength, a presence that needs no introduction. And it is here that the real transformation begins, not in chasing, but in ceasing to chase. Yet Nietzsche also knew that the desire for validation is rarely solitary. It feeds on something larger, the illusion of belonging. It is not only individuals we chase, but the embrace of the crowd, the safety of the herd. And to understand why this is perhaps an even greater danger, we must now turn to the second truth, the illusion of belonging to the crowd. If this content is resonating with you, consider subscribing. I make videos that help you see the world and yourself more clearly. Thank you. For Nietzsche, there was always a deep suspicion towards the crowd. He saw that people cling to groups not out of courage, but out of fear. Fear of standing alone, fear of being different, fear of carrying the weight of their own judgment. To belong to the herd feels safe, but it is the safety of animals huddled together, terrified of the night. Comforting, yes, but never liberating. When someone chases the acceptance of a group, they often lose the very thing that gave them individuality. Speech becomes rehearsed, opinions become recycled, and even silence becomes calculated, waiting to see what others will approve before daring to move. Nietzsche called this surrender to the herd a form of spiritual death, because when everyone thinks the same, no one truly thinks at all. Modern research gives subtle weight to this old truth. Social psychology has long shown how conformity shapes behavior. In the famous Asch experiments, individuals agreed with answers they knew were false, simply because the group had chosen them. Their own perception bent under the invisible weight of belonging. And though centuries have passed since Nietzsche's words, this experiment reveals the very mechanics of what he feared. The herd does not just absorb, it reshapes, it silences, it molds the spirit until originality fades into imitation. But imitation is costly. The nervous system, when forced to suppress authentic expression, enters a state of inner conflict. Studies of cognitive dissonance show that when beliefs and actions misalign, stress hormones surge, heart rates climb, and the body carries the burden of the lie. To dissolve individuality into the crowd is not harmless, it corrodes from within. And yet many still chase it, the applause of the majority, the safety of collective approval, unaware that this safety is the most fragile illusion of all. Nietzsche's voice still cuts through. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. Real strength, then, is not found in running with the herd, but in daring to step apart even when it feels unbearable. The crowd offers comfort, but it also demands your soul as payment. The question is whether that trade is worth it. And here, inevitably, comes the wound. Because the moment you step away, the crowd rejects you. Friends may fall silent, acquaintances may disappear, doors may close. Rejection, in this sense, is not a possibility but a certainty. But Nietzsche insisted that even this pain can be transfigured. What appears as rejection can be turned into power. And this is where we must go next, to understand how the very sting of rejection, if embraced, becomes the ground upon which greatness is built. Rejection. It is a word that feels like a wound. Doors closing, voices withdrawing, the quiet absence of those who once seemed near. For most, rejection is seen as evidence of inadequacy, a verdict against one's worth. But Nietzsche, ever the challenger of illusions, inverted the meaning. To him, rejection was not failure, but material, the raw stone from which strength could be carved. He believed that suffering was not something to be avoided, but something to be used. That which does not kill me makes me stronger, he wrote, not as a slogan, but as a recognition of how the human spirit is shaped under pressure. And modern science, centuries later, offers its confirmation. Studies on post-traumatic growth reveal that adversity, when faced consciously, can lead to increased resilience, clarity of values, and deeper inner strength. The very experiences that wound often become the ground for transformation. Consider how the nervous system reacts to rejection. The brain processes social pain in the same regions as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex lights up, as if the body itself had been struck. This explains why rejection feels so sharp, so bodily. But here is the hidden key. Pain, whether physical or emotional, is not merely a signal of harm. It is also a signal for adaptation. Muscles strengthen when torn, bones harden when stressed, and in the same way, the psyche learns to fortify itself when it no longer runs from the sting of rejection. Nietzsche saw rejection as training, the kind of harsh teacher that strips away illusions. When the crowd pushes you out, you are forced to stand alone. When individuals turn their backs, you are given the space to discover what remains when others are gone. And what remains, if one dares to look, is will. A will no longer shaped by flattery or applause, but by the inner command to endure and to create. This is why chasing people who do not value you is a betrayal of your own strength. Every rejection can either shrink you or sharpen you. The choice lies not in avoiding the wound, but in what you do with it. To embrace rejection as a crucible is to reclaim authority over your life. And slowly, what once felt like loss begins to reveal itself as liberation, a clearing in which something higher can emerge. For Nietzsche, that higher possibility was the Übermensch, the one who no longer bends to the judgments of others, but becomes a source of gravity in themselves. And this is where the path leads, from the pain of rejection to the power of transformation. It is here that we must turn next, to understand what it means not only to stop chasing, but to become the one who, through strength and authenticity, others are compelled to chase. Nietzsche's boldest vision was not simply to endure rejection or to resist the herd, but to become something greater, the Übermensch, the one who transcends the need for approval and radiates a force that cannot be ignored. This figure does not chase, he becomes. And in becoming, he attracts. To understand this, one must see the difference between presence that begs and presence that commands. The former is built on insecurity, on the hunger for validation, on the fragile hope that others will grant significance. The latter is born from inner mastery, from discipline, creativity, and the refusal to betray one's own values. People are drawn to this kind of presence not because it asks for attention, but because it embodies something rare: independence. Modern psychology speaks of this in the language of self-determination theory. It tells us that individuals who live from autonomy, competence, and purpose exert a gravitational pull on others. They do not need to chase because their lives radiate clarity. The nervous system responds instinctively to this. Studies show that confidence expressed through calm posture, measured speech, and consistent boundaries elevates perceived status and influence. In other words, the body itself becomes a signal of authority when the soul has ceased to beg. Nietzsche knew this without experiments. He saw that the one who creates values instead of borrowing them becomes luminous in a world of shadows. People chase because they sense something unshakable, something they cannot manufacture. It is the paradox of human relations. When you stop needing others, others begin to need you. But this path demands work. It asks for the discipline to build when no one is watching, to refine the mind when silence is the only companion, to cultivate strength without an audience. This is the quiet labor of becoming, and it is precisely this labor that turns rejection into magnetism. For when you no longer move toward others in desperation, you become the still point around which others begin to move. This is the essence of Nietzsche's challenge: to stop chasing and start building, to stop pleading and start creating, to live so fully from your own center that your very existence calls others forward. And perhaps this is the question worth leaving open here. What would it look like for you to become the one others chase, not by demanding, but by embodying? If these words have stirred something in you, I invite you to share it. Write in the comments, I choose to build, not chase. Not for me, but as a declaration to yourself, a quiet oath that your strength will no longer be borrowed from others, but forged within.